All right, everybody. Welcome back to Plenary Session. This is video edition. This is the Zoom edition. I've put together a brilliant panel of experts to talk about the balance, the pros and cons of the academy versus the industry. I have, from left across my screen at least, I'll do it that way, I have Sanam Logavi, and she is a hematopathologist at MD Anderson Cancer Center. She is an academic pathologist, and a proud member of Pathology Twitter. Sanam, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
We're going to go through in a second and you'll all tell us about your careers and lives. We have Papa Heme, Aaron Goodman. He looks like he's been touched by the sun. He might have been. He's in San Diego, California. Aaron Goodman, Papa Heme. He is a practicing heme malignancy expert, transplanter, and a master of all trades. That's what I call him. And we have, he should need no introduction on this show, Dr. David Steensmont. David Steensmont has been a previous guest of this podcast long time ago in person in Portland, Oregon. He is, of course, a longtime faculty member at the Dana-Farber Cancer Center, before that the Mayo Clinic. Now, currently, he's switched teams. He's playing for Novartis now as part of the hematology division there. And he's going to be able to talk about both sides of this question. So I thought, and thank you so much to come in, David. It's hard to get you. It's hard to get you on this show. So I thought we might start by, maybe I'll just say a real quick blurb about everyone, but then let people talk about, their own trajectory, just very briefly, to kind of where you got to, how you got to where you are, when you decided you want to go to academics, and what made you decide to switch. I've listened to so many shows. David, you did the circuit when you switched. People made you explain yourself in every podcast. It made you explain yourself. Let's start with Sodom, and then we'll go around.
Sure. I think my story is not as interesting or as exciting as David's. I actually started my residency. I did my residency in a semi-academic hospital at Cedars-Sinai in LA, which was, kind of affiliated with UCLA, but in reality, it was a private practice. It was a private practice hospital with a teaching program, with a residency program. And then I did fellowship at MD Anderson, which is like a full-blown academic center. And it was just very clear to me that, seeing both sides of the practice, that I really wanted to do academics. I wanted to stay in academics and practice in academics. And, I can elaborate on all the things that I love about academics, but that's how I settled. I saw, the private practice part and then the academic part. And to me, it was a very clear choice.
Clear choice. Now, and then the last question is, what is your current balance like? How often are you looking at slides? How often are you have research time? How do you balance your life these days?
Sure. I think one of the good things about pathology, and that's, what I try to advertise when I talk about pathology, is that it can be tailored to a very large degree, depending on what you like and how you like to practice. I think my practice is maybe atypical in a sense, because, I do probably half patient care and half research. But part of my patient care service is due to my involvement in the ECOG Leukemia Bank. I run the ECOG Leukemia Bank. And so I sign out a lot of clinical trial samples as well. So it's not only my specific, hospital patients that I'm taking care of.
I see.
In an essence, it's like that. And then, I do a lot of teaching. We have a large fellowship program. And also the Twitter engagement, it probably doesn't count towards any academic achievement, but it does take a lot of time. So I'd say that I do spend a lot of time on that too.
Oh, that's got to agree with you there. So it sounds like your clinical part and your research part kind of go hand in hand because of the cooperative group work, and then you have about half your time for research and teaching. Aaron Goodman, Papa Heme, I'm glad you could join us. You've had a busy morning. I love the shirt. Classic band for people of our age. So, Aaron, what's your life like? How did you fall into this?
Well, so I was a resident WashU, and I picked up an Onc Live, and I saw the of
you were inspired by the Onc Live.
I go, when I grow up, I want to be the Giants and have my picture in that. It's not happened yet. I'm 5 years in. I'm still going for it. No, my father was a private practice radiologist, still is actually, still working at age 70, just turned 70. Happy birthday, Dad. So I grew up in a physician household, and that clearly influenced, I think, my decision to choose medicine. In college, I did research in a biochemistry lab. Really, just to get into
Pipetting.
medical school. I'll be honest with you.
Of course,
I had to
playing
have
the
some
game. You
research.
played the game. Yeah.
No, I mean, I tried it. It just wasn't my thing. And it wasn't me in the lab, but I did it. I got some exposure, got into medical school, and then I was kind of lost till residency, where I went to WashU, which is in St. Louis, a pretty academic center. And that's kind of, it wasn't until really I was a second year resident where I finally had interns working with me, where I was kind of, not in charge, but at night you kind of are in charge. You're the only person there, and I was teaching. And I just remember them looking up to me and being like, "Man, you know so much stuff." And there I was as a second year resident, not knowing anything really, at least in my head. But the fact of teaching really inspired me, and I did a chief residency, and that really cemented that I wanted to be at an academic center where I could really continue to teach throughout my career, do some research, and take care of patients, being on the cutting edge of science. And just how my time split, I have a great gig. You're going to hear me give a lot of love for academics. Even though sometimes I'm cynical on Twitter about academics, we got it good. My gig is, so I'm a bone marrow transplanter, malignant hematologist. I take care of cancer patients or blood cancer patients from diagnosis through transplant if they need it. So some of my patients don't go that way. And I do clinic 2 days a week, which seems like a lot to me, but it is only 2 days a week. And the other 3 days are errand time. To really do what I want to do, which we can talk about later. And then 12 weeks a year, which seems like a lot, but it's once a month. I attend on the inpatient bone marrow transplant leukemia cellular therapy service, where I typically round in the morning for 3 hours with a very large team, we're that classic flock where I'm the quarterback, and it's very enjoyable. We take great care of patients, do a lot of learning on rounds. And, those weeks I'm busier, but that's basically my split right now. It's a good balance.
That's wonderful, and I think you also log the long hours of being probably one of the strongest hematology teachers on Twitter. We'll come to that too. We'll come to that. David, thank you so much. I'm glad I was able to get this down on the books. People who want to know your full background, they got to go back and listen to the podcast with you. It was actually, I think, one of the most listened to episodes in the pre-COVID era. Sorry, COVID blew all the statistics out of the park. But David has had, really a wonderful career from Mayo Clinic to Dana-Farber to Novartis. David, tell us a little bit about, the journey and especially the recent switch.
Yeah, I've made 2 big switches in my career. I'm a Midwesterner by temperament. Most of my family's in Michigan. Our oldest daughter now is in East Lansing. She's doing a PhD in plant biochemistry. So
from my alma mater, from State.
Your alma mater, yeah, probably a little bit, a few hundred yards away, different part of town in the plant building. So, I went to medical school, University of Chicago. Which I think you're also familiar with.
Yeah, that's also my alma mater. Okay, yeah.
and then went out to Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and loved it. Very clinically heavy institution. Got terrific clinical training. Got inspired very early on by hematology. Knew that was what I wanted to do. Went away for a couple of years to England as part of the training, and came back on the faculty at Mayo. I had a lab. Who was doing clinical trials, seeing lots of patients. And then in 2009, I got this opportunity to come to Boston. Gary Gilliland and Rich Stone invited me out, and they one of the things that I was really lured by was the ability, and Mayo's a terrific place, and it's I have family members who are patients there. But the one thing that Boston really had was this scientific ecosystem, lots of big lab groups that were just doing really terrific things, including Gary. And so I made the switch. 2009 came, got involved. Collaborations with Ben Ebert were really terrific. We continue to stay close in touch. Doing clinical trials of various things with Dan D'Angelo and Rich and the leukemia group, just was really enjoying that. And then, the pandemic started and things were it was a challenging time. I did a couple months actually on the inpatient COVID oncology service, which was absolutely fascinating. Felt like, like we turned back time 20 years in medicine with getting rid of all the various prior authorizations and all the things that make our lives as clinicians difficult.
Right.
But then it all started coming back, and coming back with a vengeance. And I got this call from the leader of Novartis's Institute for Biomedical Research, NIBR,
Jay Bradner, another Chicago grad.
Yeah, I had met him. He was within a year of me at UFC. I really didn't get to know him till I came to the Farber. Just a terrific chemist, scientist, inspirational guy. And he said, we really need a hematologist for early drug development. And I'd always been kind of fascinated by that world and I thought, no, that I'm not an industry guy. I'm an academic guy. I dyed in the wool. And he called, and so I said no. So he called back a few weeks later and he said, come visit and see what we're about. And I did, and I was really impressed actually with how thoughtful the people I met were with the scientific research that was going on. Some of the people, Alice Shaw, who thoracic oncologist from MGH, and Jeff Engelman, just really good colleagues potentially I thought to work with, and they proved to be. And so, I was turning 50 and thinking, what do I want to do for the next stage of my life? And I said, I'll give this a try. And so start 50th birthday, December 2020.
Wow.
It's been really an incredible learning experience, and I've had a lot of fun with it. There's lots of different jobs in industry, and so what I do is different from what other people in industry would do. I get to interact still with a lot of academics. I'm very closely connected to the science, and that part of it's really fun.
And then tell us a little bit about your week to week. How do you divide your time?
Yeah, it's really very varied. So some of it is. A big part of it is our clinical programs. And, just like children being raised, drugs being raised go through different problems and challenges and need to be helped through that sometimes. So, it's everything from helping prepare regulatory filings to looking at data from individual patients on studies to the bigger picture of thinking where clinical unmet needs. A scientist will call and say, it's really interesting antibody, really interesting small molecule. It targets this. Is there a place in hematology where that might be necessary? There's also a lot of discussion with our late development colleagues. What can we bring forward? What are their priority disease areas? And a lot of just chatting with investigators, with scientific teams about the potential. It's a really dynamic place to work. And I have no idea where the fax is. I have not touched a fax machine in 2 years. And I used to have one like right next to my desk, and I was always faxing back and forth. That part of my life is gone.
Well, you don't miss that part. And congratulations on the 50th birthday and the transition. And I got a lot of questions for you all. Okay, I guess I have to go very quickly because I feel like for the sake of full disclosure, so people will know where I'm coming from. I think I'm probably very close to Aaron because I'm a hem-onc doctor. I do, it's varied between 1 and 2 days a week of clinic depending on need. Right now I'm doing 1 day a week of clinic of heme and heme malignancy at the general. But I think this fall I signed up for another, so it's gonna jump back up a little bit. And then I do about 14 weeks of inpatient service, always on hem-onc consults, so always with the fellow between the general and the VA. So we cover everything, but always with the fellow, which is great. And then the rest of my time, I spend, research. We have a epidemiology group, and then teaching a few classes, and then this kind of stuff that I really enjoy. Okay. The first question, I have a feeling, I think Sanam and Aaron have a lot in common in the sense they're both sort of consummate teachers. They love heme malignancy. They're both happy to look at a slide. I'm happy to look at a slide for the first 15, 20 seconds. And then afterwards, I'm happy to move right along. And so I get a sense that, you know, both of those two are going to talk about love of teaching, and we're going to come to that. And then David, I think people should also know, you know, he wasn't a typical academic when he was an academic. Of course he was. He ran trials. He even had a lab for a time. You know, he did all the sort of classic hematology lab and trialist stuff, and he was a consummate clinician, but he also had that literary bent in him. He also had the love of writing, and he has written many, many great essays that we talk about in our prior discussion. So I think you have a very interesting perspective, and I'd love to hear about the transition. But the first question I wanted to ask you all, which I think is a real icebreaker, is I want to jump right to, what is the part of the job that you dislike the most? What do you actually hate about your job? What is the part that you wish you could replace? And many years ago, I met a senior physician, and I asked him, you know, what percent of the time do you do what you love and what percent of the time do you do what you have to? And he was like, I'm 90-10, what I love and what I have to. And so what is that part that you have to do? Maybe we'll go to Aaron, Sonam, and then David on this. Aaron, what's the part that you hate about your job? And I guess you might say prior auth.
Yeah, you know, actually, to be honest, I enjoy the part of prior auth when I finally get to the physician to speak with. That part I actually do enjoy.
Why? Because you give him a little education.
Well, you give him some teaching, and I usually, you know, it's like not a competition, but you want to get the drug for your patient, and it's usually successful. It's the process of getting them there. But for me, it's easy. It's email, which probably isn't unique to being an academic physician. But it's I really think 300 emails a day, a lot of junk, but
how much are OncLive? How many are real emails you have to respond to?
After OncLive, maybe 2. You're right. You know, after OncLive are the administrative emails that are given the same exact email by 10 different people because they don't think you've seen the first one. But, you know, nothing good usually comes from email. It's either junk or it's something I got to do that I don't want to do. And that's the least favorite part of my day. And I used to be very diligent at doing it every day at the end of the day, but lately not so much. And I just said, what happens if I don't do it? And someone pointed this out on Twitter. I forget who made it. It's not my original thought, but that deadlines in academic are kind of, they're not like real. You know what I mean? Well, you have to do this meaningless task. But from self-experimentation, nothing ever bad happens when I'm late on those things. I'm being serious. What are they going to do? You didn't do your online, environmental training on time. You know, nothing bad's going to happen. So I've learned to balance that. But emails for sure, the worst part.
The worst part. Well put. You know, I heard a rumor, and I think you'll be interested, that Baselga, when he was in his prime, he got so many emails, he had to hire someone just to sit there to do his email. And then he would just be a consultant for the email manager.
I believe that.
I put emails up there. Sonam, what's the part of the job that you dislike the most?
You know, I have to tell you, I was thinking, but you know, when you raise that question, it's really hard for me to think of something that I really hate about my job. And I think, you know, that tells you how fortunate and lucky I feel.
Yeah, exactly. That's something. That's something.
But you know, if I had to choose one thing, I would say it's not email, because that's like my primary mode of communication. I never call the fellows. I communicate through email, so I don't mind the email. But it's the mandatory. It's like the online training stuff, you know. And I don't think that's unique to academics. I'm sure all institutions have, you know, the mandatory training stuff. But I find most of it is a waste of time that can be spent doing better things.
But how are you going to learn to take privacy seriously if you don't do a few online modules? How are you going to ever learn that?
You know, I understand the logic that the institutions have to protect themselves by offering these. You know, I understand it to an extent, but I don't think it's a very, useful or efficient use of everyone's time. And also, I have to say the thing that I really don't like is writing up my own annual review every December. It's just a pain. I never look forward to that. So those are the two things that I don't like, but the everyday, you know, tasks, I actually enjoy doing.
You're going to sell these people on pathology. I think you're going to sell a few people. David, how about you? What is the part of the Novartis, is it the DocuSign? What are you doing these days that, that gets you? What's the part that gets you?
Well, we do have our own online modules, so that's universal.
That's ubiquitous, huh?
To every kind of institution, I think. suspect even churches and religious institutions have online training. I would say the hardest part of my job, and it isn't the part of the job that I hate, it's just difficult, is there's not unlimited resources. Even in a very large and well-funded company, resources aren't unlimited. One of my heroes, the late Dr. Esty, used to say there's few ideas that are too silly to test in a clinical trial. However, you have to prioritize which ones are worth paying for, and so it's the prioritization and the things where you think, well, that could work, but it's a lot less likely to work than this other thing, or there's a much greater need here, so the resources should be put here. I think that's the hardest part.
The hardest part is prioritizing.
Prioritizing, yeah.
But to some degree, I mean, that's why they pay you the big bucks, because that's the part that only you can. I mean, really, there's like it's sort of a value of information question, which is like which of these things has the most probability of success / importance / market share / return on investment, etc. That's gonna. I would imagine that like also it's satisfying for you to think about that.
Yeah, and it's not easy because you're doing it with incomplete information. We know intellectually that most drugs that enter the clinic are going to fail. They're not going to get to an FDA approval. So how do you pick the ones that have the best probability of success? And you look at all the data, you look at the external landscape and look at the science, but at the end of the day, there's a judgment call there. And it's hard because you're going to be wrong sometimes. And things that maybe didn't look so good are going to turn out to be really hugely successful. I mean, this is well before my time, but 20 plus years ago, it was difficult for Brian Drucker and colleagues to convince the leadership of Novartis to develop a drug in CML. And yet there was a visionary leader chemist who's now the chair of board of directors, and Brian and a few others who saw what it could be and completely transformed the disease. But it's like investment analysts. The majority of them are wrong. You read these predictions about what the Fed's going to do, or how different sectors are going to do, or goodness, Jim Cramer on Mad Money, and he doesn't know anything. He's wrong more times than not. Intelligent.
He just missed one major financial crisis. No. Yeah, anyone could have missed it. Anyone could have missed it. I see. That's really interesting. And to be honest with you, that's part of the reason why I could never do basic science laboratory work, because I feel like you got to get up there and give a talk and be a believer that you are the one who's got the thing that's successful. When in reality, I'm always just overwhelmed with the fact that the odds are 100,000 to 1. That I'm actually going to be a bust. And even your boss, who is brilliant, JQ1, I don't see on the shelves. I didn't see bromodomain inhibitors getting to the market quite yet, but okay. Yeah, your point's well taken, and I think that's got to be tough. Now, here's my next question. Okay, this is going to be about, I want to showcase a little bit about why I think Sonam and Aaron like the Academy, and I think one of the big things that drive both of them is teaching. And I think it's easy, and everyone will concede that when you have an interested pupil, when you have somebody there who really wants to learn, I'm always blown away when I have somebody who coming and they're like, oh, I read these 3 articles, what do you think? And then they go back and you mention something in passing and they do some homework and they bring it. What's it like teaching the reluctant student? The person who comes through on your service and they're like, you know what, I don't need to know heme path. And for you, Aaron, somebody who comes by and says, I don't need to know Erdheim-Chester disease. Does it have what's the mutation in again? How do you deal with the challenging teaching? Do you still find it validating? Sonam, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to say, I think enthusiasm is contagious. When I see fellows that want to learn, I'm obviously like hyped up and I want to do more and I want to do just like something extra to teach them. But I do view teaching as an essential part of my job. I think it's, one of the most important parts of my job. And so even for the students that are not as enthusiastic, I force it on them. I don't care if they want to learn or not. If they're sitting with me at the microscope, they have to learn. They have to pay attention. Obviously, I'm not as excited about it, I think, and it probably comes through to them as well. But, you know, I mean, I take it very seriously. And I tell them, you know, I say, you know, this is your time to learn. You know, why are you wasting your time? You know, you're going to go out on your own in 2 years and you're going to have to make these decisions. You can make decisions, you can make mistakes now. And it's at no cost to anyone because there's someone there that's going to fix it after you.
Yeah.
But after you go, you know, after you go out and on your own, you know, the world is going to be a very different and brutal place. So you better take this time to learn. And usually works.
And what's the goal? And the goal is they have to all be nearly perfect. I mean, if they're training in HEMPAT, they come out, they have to be like nearly perfect. Is that right?
You know,
it's not like our jobs where we can. There's quite a window of tolerability, but
pathology training is interesting. You know, when you first enter pathology, it's like almost everybody's clueless. It's like you're learning an entirely different language. You look at slides and you have no idea what you're looking at. You know, it's very different from what you learned in medical school. But I think after a while, after like the third or fourth year, it starts making sense. But we have, at least in the US, I think, you know, most pathologists have the luck and fortune now of super subspecialization, right? So everybody's subspecializing. And you know, like the general search path practice is now very, very rare. It's almost like a dying, you know, breed. And it's probably the hardest thing to do. But our fellows, you know, by the time they graduate, they've done 2 years of straight HEMPAT. So they tend to be like very good by the time they're going out. But there are people that are just brilliant. And, you know, some people are competent, others are brilliant. So.
That's interesting. And then do you also get students who are not going into pathology, but you show them the basics? Not too much.
No, very rare.
So you're fortunate to get people who really care about what you're doing. Yeah.
We get people like towards the end of their training. And I think, you know, that's,
Do you ever look at a slide and before you can even articulate why, you have an intuition what it is? You're just like, oh, that's that. And then you're like, and the reason is that this.
Yeah. I mean, all the time.
All the time now. Yeah. I mean, I think when you look enough, that's what kind of happens. And sometimes it's even hard to articulate what it is that makes you so certain. We call that AI, huh? Visual processing AI. You can't even say why. Aaron, what about you? I mean, I see you. You've got, you know, great tutorials. You got a loyal following. But what about the student, you know, who is, you know, not paying attention, not interested in the intricacies of B-cell lymphoma? How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, you know, with medical students these days, they usually at least fake interest. But I'm pretty good at, you know, I teach the second year hematology course to the MS2s. So, and it's actually the first introduction into pathology. You know, they do all the, you know, normal life stuff. And then the second year is when they start learning about disease, and hematology is the first course. And despite my love for hematology, I recognize when I enter that small group of about 20 students that the love for coagulation and leukemias isn't going to be as palpable and as enthusiastic as I have. I get it. And you know, I usually go around and I always like asking anyone considering a career in hematology, and, you know, there's, you know, one or maybe a few, or at least oncology. But, you know, you can, fine. Maybe I'm stereotyping. You could see the orthopods in the audience, the surgeons, and you see what's going on. And you know, so, you know, I start out that course, and, you know, we get the blackboard out, we go through the coagulation cascade, and I actually like teaching the students who are not interested. And, you know, it's more rewarding to get, you know, someone who's disinterested in the field, or maybe that wasn't their first choice, to see why I think hematology is so fascinating and cool.
So you like to pass the spark on.
I like to pass the spark on, and you know, you know, the key is being interactive, getting them involved, and eventually, you know, it's problem solving hematology. I think anyone who goes into medicine likes problem solving, even if they don't want to treat acute leukemia, you know, or know what, you know, the intricacies of fibrinogen and the different domains. You know, you draw it out and you connect it, and again, nothing's ever. I think what gets past a lot of physicians, and I learned this from attending class myself. You know, when you learn about acute leukemia, sometimes they pick the acute leukemia god or goddess to give that talk on acute leukemia, who only studies acute leukemia, knows every little mutation and all the little things. And for the medical student level 2, they don't got to know much about acute leukemia, right? I mean, you need to know how it presents, how how important it is to recognize it early that these patients are going to die fairly fast if you don't start a abrupt treatment. And so that's how I kind of approach those things and tie it into how it connects to all the other specialties and how they're dealing with it. And I feel like I can usually get most people involved and at least a little bit enthusiastic in it. And so that's how I do it. I make things very clinical, very basic. Nothing's ever too basic, even when you're teaching medical students and above. So.
It's funny you say that, because I think very similar to you. Many years ago, when I was just first few years of faculty, a senior lymphoma doctor said, "You know what? Why don't you teach that second year medical class on B-cell lymphomas?" And I said, "Oh, you sure? I mean, I'm kind of, And he's like, "Oh, here's my slide deck, and just go teach it." And then I went. I realized why he passed it off, because it was literally the worst slide deck I've ever seen. It was like literally 170 slides, and it was like follicular, grade 1, grade 3, 3A. 3B, DLBCL, blah, 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 blah. And it was just like rote memorization for the audience. And I looked at it, and I think the first year I gave it, and it was horrific, and everyone was passed out, and I could tell it was just a train wreck. And I was like, I really, I'm used to talking about work I'm passionate about, my research, and now I'm talking about work I'm not passionate about. But then the next year I re-envisioned it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to present this as the reality of life, which is actually, as Plato says, the goal of biology is to carve nature at the joints. But when it comes to neoplasm in the B-cell lineage, there's not really natural joints, and the WHO is always arbitrarily carving things. What if we thought of it as a spectrum from, slow to very, very fast, from marginal zone to Burkitt's, and then also from germinal center B-cell differentiation to plasmacytic B-cell differentiation. And you think of this kind of spectrum, and you get cancer that can arise anywhere along this spectrum. And there's some cancers that they've always got some fraction of cells in G0 you can never eradicate, can never cure. Those have certain principles of treatment, only treat if it's causing a problem. And other cancers where you can have curative intent and they have different principles of treatment. And so I kind of presented it that way, left out all the memorization, just showed them the stuff, and it transformed the lecture, and they kind of really liked it. But, I do think you have to meet people where they are. And I do think it's sometimes it's tough to, to give the lecture and realize that, maybe all this person needs to know is when to call the attending and when to give hydria. That's really all they really need to know. David, here's my question for you. I mean, I'm happy to, if you want to say a word about the teaching. You want to say a word about teaching, or I have a different one for you? Say what you. So, when you were a teacher, you were a consummate teacher. What was the toughest challenge for you with these teachers, with these students?
One thing I was really fortunate about was that early in my career as a specialist, I'd had really great teachers all along, but Ilu Teferi at Mayo Clinic was really, I think, for medical students, for trainees, for doctors who are not specialists in the area, the consummate teacher, because he could, break things down to what's the most important, just as you were describing. The guy was awarded Teacher of the Year by Mayo medical students so many times that finally they just gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award and,
and took him out of the running. Yeah.
He's not eligible. We got to give somebody else
It was like the Oprah Winfrey of the.
Yeah.
So that I tried to consciously imitate. Obviously he's inimitable and he's got his own style, but his ability to distill things down to the essence and make them interesting. And the late John Altman at University of Chicago was also very good at that. One of the main reasons I'm in hematology as a field, because he could bring in all this history and culture and society into his lectures about, globinopathies that otherwise could have been really cut and dry. And with the emphasis on the dry. So he was really a great teacher as well. So, and the interesting thing is, even though I'm in an industry role now, I still get to do a lot of teaching, because the vast majority of the 100,000 people that work at Novartis are not hematologists, number one. And I can still do external teaching and present at conferences. Now, conflict of interest rules limit a little bit what I can.
But ASH just changed him this year. You could be on that stage at ASH now. You can.
Yeah, it is, because they were getting really a little bit silly.
They were silly. I agree, because the person who does the work should actually present the work. It doesn't matter where they are. Yeah, I do think. But okay, so go on. Finish your thought. I interrupted.
So I still get to do that, which I find very rewarding.
You know, one thing you said that I just want to make a point is that, John Altman at University of Chicago, and I think they've named like lectures after him now, because he wasn't there when I was there, but the lecture I think was named after him, talking about things outside of medicine to draw parallels and draw examples. I think it's a little bit harder now, actually, because everyone is so sensitive, and you worry that you'll walk onto a topic that people have very strong feelings on. And so, I used to have a joke, and now I have like 5 filters in my mind. Like, does my joke pass all my filters? And by the time I tell the joke, it's not funny anymore. But I do feel like something is being lost in this. Aaron Goodman, how do your jokes go down in the class? It's a little tough crowd these days, huh? Tough crowd.
I think most people who know me, even my colleagues, I do joke around a lot, and I'm pay attention. You think before you speak. Even on Twitter, we're human.
But you're 3 jokes away from 2 more modules.
We've all made stupid things, and I think people who know me know I'm a good person, but yes, you do
that doesn't count much in this world. Okay, so okay, this is the question to David. This is the question to all of us. But I'll give it David the first crack at this question. This is the question I think that's the motivator. It feels as if, and actually we have empirical data, and I'll tell you about our data in a second, but it feels as if there's an exodus to the biopharmaceutical industry, particularly from people who have background in our domains, medical oncology, hematology, hemalignancy. One thing is that the pandemic it shakes you and makes you realize what matters in life. And if, maybe what matters in life is not doing epic notes at 11 p.m. at night. And so naturally somebody's going to say, screw this, I'm sick of this. I don't want to bill level 5 anymore. And they want to look for other opportunities. And this is a opportunity where you get to use a lot of your knowledge. So that's a natural thing. The next question I had was, is it even true? Is there really even an exodus? But we've done some work, and I think somebody I work with is going to write this up soon, and we're going to publish it. But actually, it does look to be that way, that there is an increase in turnover over the last 5 years. And it's not explained by retirement because of the age of graduation of people. We use a Medicare data set. It's probably explained by people in the early career, first 5 years, switching. And that's happening a little bit more frequently, I think. We'll try to finish up our analyses. But the question, of course, is why? Is it the shock to the system because the pandemic makes you think about what's important? Is it sort of secular trends in medicine that have gotten the straw that broke the camel's back? I think from when I was a student to where I am now, the amount of paperwork the attending has to do has increased exponentially. The paperwork, the modules, and even the difficulty. My attending used to co-sign my notes with his hand, his or her hand. Now I have to co-sign notes with, 2-factor authentication and 3 login screens. And I think it's different for people who are coming out of fellowship, who go straight to the industry, versus people like David, who had really long and accomplished careers going to the industry. So that's the question, David. People like you, Nina Shah, Alice Shaw. That's another one. I forgot about A.T. Shaw. And even Jay before. I think Jay was one of the first when he was recruited. But that's a very important seat in biomedicine. So what is it, David? Why are they leaving?
I think there's a push and a pull.
You're going with the push-pull. Okay, go on. No,
So, and actually the 2 worlds have gotten a lot closer together in some ways.
That's one of my points,
as well. But I think, industry, there's a lot of really cool stuff going on. And sometimes people want to be part of that. There's also, once some people that you know or respect make that change, the activation energy becomes less for you doing that.
That's a really interesting point. Yeah. When Alice Shaw goes, it tells a lot of people like this is a very legitimate career opportunity.
Yeah, and a very legitimate place to be doing work. If they can recruit somebody like that, who we envy how much she's been able to accomplish. So I think that's part of it. Is there's the pull part is just there's so much cool science going on. There's just and you don't have to be applying for grants all the time to be able to do it. And writing progress reports and such to the same degree, and getting your hair cut from your NIH grant, because every grant I got from NIH ever had like some percentage lopped off the top, and then I had to think about, well, how am I actually going to do the experiments? So that's part of it. The other is is the push. And I get a lot of people reaching out from academia, exploring making that transition. And the one thing that I really want to establish with everybody I talk to is, are they reaching out because they really want to do the job in industry? Because there is a lot of cool stuff about it. Or are they reaching out because they're so dissatisfied with their current position and with what their day-to-day life is? And there are, I love my clinical practice. I love teaching, but as you guys have alluded to, there's so much that comes along with that. The amount of time for doing the electronic notes, the extra administrative burden of you can't just prescribe something anymore. You've got to go through so many different hoops of in approvals and navigating clinical pathways for some institutions. And it just, the proportion of the day that was the really fun part, sitting in front of the patient, talking to them, talking with your fellows about why do we approach this condition this way? What is the differential diagnosis here? What might be going on? Those things that I think we get a lot of energy from, we're becoming less and less. And Tate Shanafelt, who's the chief wellness officer at Stanford, I'll finish with this stuff.
No, that's
he and Lottie Derby at the Mayo, they've done some really interesting research, which suggests like 20% is that magic proportion of your day, that if 20% of your activities are the things that really give you energy, you can put up with a lot in that other 80%. They're experts on burnout. They're experts on wellness, on career satisfaction. They've got a lot of empiric data backing this up. So if it drops down to 12%, you're in trouble. You're at risk.
And if it goes to 22%, then that's why the hospital windows don't open. That's what they make sure. They make sure those windows are not going to open up on you. But you know what, David? I have to say one more thing in addition to what you're saying, which is, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I honestly think the university, they have no incentive and they don't care about retention, because every year we have a factory of the cheapest labor force on planet Earth who don't know no better, and that's the fellows. And we're going to take a fellow, give him 3 days a week of clinic, and give him 12 weeks of service, and we're going to run him. We're going to run him, and we're going to pay him like $200,000, but I'm going to make another $200,000 off their backs. I could never get away with doing that for a full professor who's 30 years in the job, because they know how the money works. And I have this unlimited labor force. So if I lose, star people, I mean, mid-career stars, or I'm losing them all the time, I just don't think they need a few to keep the donors happy, but I just don't think they care. And the people running it are no longer, or they're increasingly moving towards, we're picking people to run this who are good money managers and not really scholars. And even when they were scholars, their scholarship is money management to some degree. But I mean scholarship in the traditional sense of the word, what you mean it to be. The kind of person who's going to seek us and write about it, and write about genetics and what's the link between genetics and disease, which is still really sort of a very important issue and not fleshed out, and also write about an experience he had and what it makes him think about mortality. That's what I think is scholarship, like you. To me, you're the ultimate scholar, but nobody values that. Nobody cares. They're happy to let those scholars go. We have an unlimited labor force. Thoughts, David? Universities don't care. That's my intention.
Well, I think it's very microenvironment dependent, and
typical bone marrow doctor. Microenvironment. Okay, go back to the microenvironment. All right, go on.
I would say institution dependent, but even within institutions, there's a lot of variation. I mean, I saw departments at Dana-Farber, overall an institution that I think still really retains a terrific core of scholarship. But there were departments that were dysfunctional, and you'd see an eager new fellow join that department and think, oh boy, why did they pick that? And then, 2 years later, they're leaving to hike the Appalachian Trail for 6 months.
And not like Mark Sanford did, and not like Mark Sanford. Okay.
Geez, the real Appalachian Trail.
Appalachian Trail. Yeah, they're really hiking Appalachian Trail. Sanam, what do you... finish your thought.
So it's so dependent on the microenvironment. And I think there are institutions and groups within those institutions where the leaders really do develop and protect their faculty and try to make sure to push back against those institutional forces that make it more difficult. And there are other places where they're just not effective leaders, where the leader is concerned only about themselves, and the department can do what it wants. And that's, I think, where you see so much pain.
You know what we do with a leader like that? We promote him. Okay, Sanam, what do you... We promote that person. Sanam, what do you think? I mean, I guess my question is, do you feel it's the same in your field? And if so, what do you think the causes are?
don't think it's the same in my
Okay.
field for several reasons. I think one is that the opportunities are not the same for pathologists. The roles that you can take on in the industry, I don't think are as satisfying as either practice, academic or private practice, or at least it's not been well defined yet. And the other thing is, I listen to all of you speak about all the bureaucracy and the reasons for burnout, and they're really non-existent in pathology.
Really?
I don't have to deal with prior authorizations. I don't have to do epic notes. I don't have to do I almost I feel like it's a secret and I shouldn't say it, but I want to encourage people to go into pathology. So I literally get paid to learn. That's my job. My most important job is to learn and just get better and better at what I do. I mean, that to me is,
you're like an NFL player then. You're getting played to improve, work out.
It is
Cognitively.
in essence. I am my my most, I guess, important student,
Right. And you're also your most important judge. You're judging.
I'm constantly learning, and I get paid to do it. I cannot imagine a better gig. So,
now, what about the few times the pathologist calls me and says you need to reorder some stain or genetic test because we can't order because that's called self-referral? What is this business going on?
Yeah, I think also a little bit different in our hospital setting because we're an NCI designated cancer center. The billing is a little bit different. We do actually order things on our own cases all the time.
Without having to ask
Yeah, the only reason, I'll tell you, I can even order NGS genetics. I can order anything I want. The only reason I reach out to the the nurse practitioners or the APPs to order things is that it's just faster. I email them and I say, can you order this? It's faster and more efficient for me to ask them to order it. Otherwise, I can order whatever I want.
This is what it takes to make cancer history.
It's I'm telling you, it's crazy.
All right. If I wasn't so old, my brain don't work no more, I would think about going back, do a little more residency training. Aaron, what about you? What do you think is leading to this exodus, at least in your line of work? She has a good job. I have to say, every time I hear you talk, I'm like, that sounds really good.
Oh, I've told her I want to be a pathologist. It's too late now.
You could be. You actually know how to look at those slides.
A little bit.
He qualifies for the boards. If he does a fellowship, he qualifies for HemePath boards. He can sit for HemePath.
If she watched me try to focus a slide right now, she would be so embarrassed and she would never talk to me again. She just sees me try to get it in focus. It's a little rusty. Okay, Aaron, so what about you?
Yes,
what do you think?
Your question was,
why are they leaving? Why are they leaving? Why are you fellows always going?
It's pretty tempting to work at Carrier Farm, that's
the big Carrier Farm.
The big dream. I'm sorry. So I think, as with any complex issue, and there's many facets, there is many microenvironments, for the clinician who wants to run trials, design trials, and do all those things. It's the job, I think, in industry is fairly similar. Granted, you're not directly taking care of the patients, but if you do it as an academic, you're either finding funding for yourself, which can be quite difficult and sometimes painful, or you're working with an industry-sponsored study. But the fun part, the industry's done all, right? They designed the study, they wrote the protocol, they did the design of the study, they even get to write the paper these days. So why would you do it? Why would you do it in academics when you can do it in the industry and probably get paid more money? I don't know that to be true, but it seems that way. So I think it's, if you're under that mindset, I don't think it's unreasonable to consider industry. But for myself, to me, it makes no sense for me to ever go to industry, nor do I think any industry would ever hire me.
Not without a haircut.
Yes, not. Well, yeah. I mean, could I walk in with the Nirvana? I'm working today. Sorry, UCSD.
Could you walk into the?
I'm at work having
the new office. I see these Google, Facebook people. They look like I won't make my joke, but yeah, you can't really tell because it's very casual. Okay, so your point is, I mean, but the root of it is, it's not just the casualness of the job that you like. You would not. I mean, you really like something about the type of teaching you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, what I get to do is I just don't think I could do any. So first, if you're in academics, I mean, yeah, it's research that you. I mean, I like taking care of patients, so that's number one. Okay, and I do like taking care of patients, even though sometimes I'm like, man, it'd be easier if I didn't take care of patients. The sum balance of the benefit and gain to my life is better by taking care of patients. Now, I think if I took care of patients 5 days a week and saw 40 a day, that would be not doable for myself, because I wouldn't be able to provide the type of care that I want, and I would go nuts. But in academics, I'm allowed to see not nearly as many patients. I still get to, before ever I see a new patient, I get to read about the patient. I have some time to do so. I learn. I see the patients, usually with a fellow. So at the same time, I get to teach. And, you know, I don't think I can't do that in any other job. This is the job that allows me to do that. And yes, I guess I take a pay cut. But if anyone complains about paying academics, we do well. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you know, we're not poor. We're all paid very reasonably well in academics. Yeah, it might not be as much as private practice, but I'm not seeing 10,000 patients.
I'm going to send you some San Francisco Redfin, and then you'll change your tune, my friend, on pay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, but it just depends. Like, you know, maybe if I worked at UCSD and I was a sole trialist and a different thing, maybe I would see things different. At least for what I want out of academics, it works perfectly for me. And I'm fortunate. I am at a good, you know, my division and my cancer center. I mean, I'm in a great place. I mean, everyone's kind. Like the egos that I maybe saw or the competitiveness I saw at other places, it exists to some extent, but it's not as bad, and it's tolerable for me. And I think even I'm sure in industry, David could say there's probably egos and tensions too. It's just different types of arguments. So I think to summarize, for me, balance of everything. I don't think I could achieve that doing any other job, even though I have to do 300 emails a day and a half from Enclave. I can put up with that. I can put up with that. It's a small price to pay. And I want to let fellows and medical students listen to this. Don't listen to those disgruntled, burnt out people on Twitter. Academics is awesome. Okay. And it's rewarding, and please consider it. Don't just, we have a good job.
And, one thing I want to point out is that something, a theme you're pulling on, which is something I really do agree with, which is that this entire conversation is really from a privileged position. My parents are immigrants. The idea that work would be something you enjoyed doing for money, it was like not even in their thought process. It's like you work to feed your family, so your kids like have clothes on their back. And if you get any pleasure from the work, that's just all gravy. And yet here we are in the modern world, and we're like, 10% of my job is annoying. It's like, it's called work, buddy. That's why you get the check. And to be honest, even though we complain about the pay, we also have to be honest that we are paid much more than the median household income in this country. And if you do a few more Enclaves, you'll be paid a lot more. So I hear. I don't get too many Enclave invitations. So I think that's important to say. And then I guess I do want to point on the burnout, and I'm curious what David thinks about this, which is that I do think, and I'm going to be careful how I put it, the system can be cruel and unfair, and it can be exploitative. And I've always been a critic of the long work hours just for the sake of work hours. I've been a critic of medical training, where we train interns to kind of be paperwork factories because we don't want to hire, staff to do that work. It can be cruel and unfair. But I do worry that in an effort to focus on wellness and burnout and make it easier for interns, the pendulum can swing too far, and you can forget that medicine is also, and it's supposed to be, it needs to be hard. It needs to push you and challenge you and make you struggle, especially when you're young in training. So you have that confidence. Just like, if you put a gun to my head right now and you said you got to go ride your bike 150 miles, I know, even though I didn't prepare for it today, and even though I may have had a drink last night, I know I can do it. Because it's psychological, because I've done it so much. And similarly, you need to know when you're in practice that if you get a day where you're slammed, you got to stay till midnight, that you can do it, and you won't, and you can skip dinner, and you can, not that you have to do that every day, but you need to know you have that within you. So I think it's important. It's hard, and I do think we're getting away from that. And now it's like sugar-coated to the point where people don't get to push themselves. And then the next point I want to see, and this is what I want David to see what he thinks. I think that many conditions in life, the more you talk about it, the more you're going to find it. long COVID is surely real, but it's not 90% of people who had COVID. But they keep talking about it on the media. It might get to 95%. Who knows? And similarly, burnout and wellness and all this stuff, the more we talk about it and have the mandatory Saturday burnout meeting, you're just breeding burnout. You're just seeding the burnout everywhere. Just like, sometimes you can actually increase suicidality by talking about it. And sometimes you can give teen mothers a robotic baby and it increases teen pregnancy. Sometimes these things backfire. And I do worry that we talk so much about burnout and people are having a pity party for themselves online all the time that of course no one is going to find the satisfaction in the job because they're complaining too much. All right, any of those you want to tackle, David? The thoughts of the unpopular opinions that yes, medical training still needs to be hard and it still needs to make you struggle, even though that doesn't mean abuse and paperwork, but it does mean hard. Or do you want to tackle we talk too much about burnout and we're causing it?
Wow, there's a lot in there.
There's a lot there.
The podcast just on that, yeah. But I think that all of us need a certain amount of challenge in our lives, and overcoming odds or just working hard and having something to show for it at the end is immensely satisfying. And I think that if something is too easy, I was just watching trailer for documentary for John McEnroe last night, and how he was on top of the world and he still wasn't happy, and he went through 37 different psychiatrists and therapists and he fired them all, and he was still unhappy at the end. I mean, we all sort of, there is a curve there between challenge. If something's too difficult, then then
frustration sets in
for breaking down.
Yeah,
I do think there's a component to clinical practice and to what academia is becoming in some places. And I don't want to overgeneralize about academia nor about industry, but a component of what people have called moral injury. And that is where, as Aaron alluded to, if we're asked to take care of so many patients or do it in a way that doesn't live up to our standards for how we think that patient should ideally be taken care of, that's really, really hard on people. I think we all have aspirations for how we want to make a difference. And sometimes things don't work out. So sometimes you run a trial and it's negative, and that's just the way life is, even if you put a lot of thought into it. But when it's a system that's set up in a way that makes you unable to be successful with something that's one of your core values, that's really hard. I mean, imagine if every time she wanted to do another immunoperoxidase stain, she had to call Aetna or United Health or something and get prior authorization, and had to do that all day long. Her job would probably be less satisfying than what it is. But she's given the freedom to look at the site and do the studies necessary to come up with, even in really hard cases, a diagnosis, and being the doctor's doctor, help the doctor who's in the clinic seeing the patient know what the patient is dealing with. And that is satisfying at the end of the day.
That's so well put. And that reminds me of something that people always ask. They say, as an oncologist, naturally you're going to have end of life conversations, and those are not easy. And you always try to be better at it. You balance maintaining some distance versus being close. But it's never nothing. It's always something. It always leaves a little bit of a mark on you. And the only thing that I think can make it as good as possible is knowing that when you go in that meeting, for that family meeting, that hard talk, you have as much time as you need. I mean, I know in my job, I'll have as much time as I need. I can take an hour and a half. I could take 2 hours, and I'll find a way to make the rest of the day work. But if you're in a busy private practice 5 days a week of clinic and you're seeing 30 patients a day, and you have, all the other demands of life, you may feel the back of your mind, I got to wrap this up. And I think that might lead to a lot of the profound moral injury that David talks about. And then the other thing is, I think that I think led to moral injury is enforcing hospital policy that I don't believe in. Even the hospital I'm currently working in, one of the policies is that you can't have unvaccinated visitors, even if somebody's and I'm like, oh, that is a great job of making sure the people who bring in BA5 here are the vaccinated people bringing in BA5 and not the unvaccinated people who also could bring in BA5. I mean, the policy makes no sense anymore. It makes no sense. And that's a moral injury. If somebody's loved one is on the sidewalk and they can't see someone as they're dying, that's a moral injury. And I don't want any part of perpetuating this bureaucratic nightmare. Okay, Sanam, the question was, I'll bring you back to the question. The question was, and also by asking this question, I'm actually getting a litmus test of your all personalities. Okay. Which is that training does need to be hard. Do you think it needs to be hard? It can't be too easy. And that you can indulge in pity. I mean, pity can also be an indulgence, and maybe that's where our burnout literature is going. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this subject. So I'll give you a little bit of a background, is that I'm from Iran. I grew up in a very military-like medical education system. So that's my background, and that's what I'm used to. So I just do not sympathize with this whole, pampering, and it's just not my thing. But I'll tell you why. Not because I think people should suffer, but I think, everybody that, gets into medical school fought so hard and tried so hard to get into medical school. And you are essentially fighting against time. You have a finite amount of time to maximize your education and learn what you need to learn to go out there and do a good job, do justice for your patients. And that's why it's hard, because time is limited. You have to maximize your time, and you can't do that by expecting to go home every day at 5 o'clock. It just doesn't work like that. It doesn't need to be hard. I try to be very compassionate with the fellows. I try to be kind. I try to do everything in my power, bring them little treats to make it a little bit more fun for them.
Yeah.
But I don't want to say, it's 5 o'clock, you're dismissed. If I'm staying here, if I'm looking at cases, you're staying, you're looking at them with me. So that's my that's my style.
Well, I'm glad you said it, because I agree with you a lot. And when I was a student, I was the last one in clinic, and when I'm an attending, I'm the last one in clinic. What happened to me? What happened in my life? I thought I'd be the one leaving, and they would have to finish the notes, but now I'm the one finishing the notes. Everyone goes. Not that that's a bad thing. I mean, I do. Of course, everyone's got things to do, but it should be hard. It's a learning opportunity. You should seize it, and I think there's I think you have to be careful. The problem was the scut work. It was the paperwork. It was the attendings that were demeaning, because they were demeaning to the student because they didn't know the answer. That's really the root reason why a lot of people are demeaning. They want to discourage them from asking more questions that will reveal the ignorance of the attending. All right, I think that's a part of it. And that was a problem, need to be solved. But the solution just can't be everyone's shift ends at 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock or fewer patients. I mean, that's an easy solution. Keep all the paperwork. Just give give the intern 3 patients instead of whatever we had 10 or 12 or I forget. Because sleep deprivation makes you forget a lot of things. Aaron, okay, but also I think, go on. You want to say something, Sanam?
I just wanted to say, but at the same time, I do realize that life is a balance, and I understand if someone has something that comes up on a day, they need to leave, we can talk about it. You can leave, it's fine. Yeah. I think as long as we're having a conversation, we're communicating, I understand it's life. But again, I think everyone should maximize their learning potential in the finite amount of time that they have.
I really think that's something that needs to be said. But I also think it's also reflective of, I think, why all of you are sort of you see the upside in what you do. You don't focus on the downside. The fact that you have that attitude. Aaron, your thoughts? Your thoughts on this question? Are we getting too soft? Too many Nirvana shirts? Too much long hair? Huh? Yeah. You look like you're a sympathizer. You're a sympathizer.
I have mixed feelings. I was in the last training group where they were still as interns. I did Q3 30-hour shifts in the ICU, and at the time I was dating my wife. We didn't have any kids, and that was all I had to really. I lived in some cheap apartment, and I don't want to do that again, but I do look back on that fondly. Although I would never want to do that again. But it was important. I think we can all agree that there's no place for an attending chewing out a medical student for not knowing an answer and being rude. I think if I see that, and we still occasionally see that now, although there is less, that needs to be called out upon, and that attending needs to be like, what's wrong with you? Okay. But there is something to working hard. And I think we sometimes forget in medicine, life is hard and what we do is hard, but other people don't. It's not like other people don't have it. They all have it easy. I mean, take a struggling family working 2 jobs, working night shifts and all that stuff. They're working hard, and it's unfair, but they're working hard. So, we take care of people's lives, and I see it it's 5 o'clock, and someone's not doing well, I'm not checking out, I'm going in and taking care of the patient and dealing with it, just like I would want if it were my loved one or myself. Not that it's 5 o'clock, I get to go home now. So I think we do need less of that. As with any complex issue, there's balance. Didn't Dave and I run some randomized study of looking at long hours? You know this stuff.
Which one?
I thought they did the resident long hours versus short hours and saw. Do you remember that data or no?
Yes. There were a few. There's a couple of studies. The Carl Bilmoria from Northwestern University, I think, ran it, and I think they were run though as non-inferiority studies with the primary endpoint of like patient error, and the non-inferiority margin was like so big you could park a school bus in. And the conclusion of the paper was that long hours is non-inferior to shorter work hours. I don't think it was run. And I think I was critical of it at the time. I think I had like a lengthy rant because I guess my point is that, yes, okay, I have a mixed point on this too. One, I think, 30-hour shifts, a few times in your career, sure. But to make a habit of it, I think you really need a compelling educational rationale or a compelling rationale while we're treating this as different than other labor forces. And so I felt like I don't think that study held water. You'll pull it up while I'm thinking about it. I think it's there was a surgical one, and there's one run at the University of Pennsylvania. Some of them have subset analyses where they wear a watch that actually measured sleep. And I think one of them showed that if you have a break in the middle of the night, you actually don't sleep anymore or something like that. And they were all very equivocal. The sample size was low. And if I recall, the non-inferiority might have been, now I remember, it might have been something like 28-day Medicare mortality, which usually runs at, 11 percentage points. And the margin was so big that, you pretty much could, you could do anything and it would fit in that margin. So you could justify any action. But to your point about asking questions and mean answers, I'll tell you a little story. When I was a student, I was on rounds. This attending was a very old cardiologist and actually, unfortunately, not living anymore. And the attending asked the medical student, it wasn't me, but asked a different medical student, what's the minute ventilation of a patient? How many liters of air is this person pushing into and out of their lungs per minute? And the student looked and said, you know what, Dr. So-and-so, I just forget. I remember reading it. I just forget that minute ventilation. And then the attending said, back in my day, they didn't let students come on the wards who didn't have basic common sense. And I was like, oh my God. And the student was like really hurt later. But then later I was like, I just have a follow-up. That wouldn't really be a common sense kind of, the minute ventilation is not exactly common sense. It's a physiologic value that's derived from experiments. And I can imagine if you didn't know that factoid, you just wouldn't know it. I don't think you could get there by common sense. I don't know how common sense gets you to that, but okay, sure. Okay. But that was a kind of snarky comment that was said quite often at the University of Chicago, David. I don't know if you may have blacked out those years, but that was entry level comments you'd get on wards.
Yeah, day one, the surgical MS3 rotation, a senior resident comes in and says, if any of you guys dare to call in sick, you better be prepared to give me your ventilator settings. So, yeah, it was hardcore.
Yeah, ventilator setting. Well, my friend was in I have to disguise it. He was in a very small residency program, and they only had like a handful of residents. And one person called in sick, and they drove to the guy's house and they pulled him back and just brought him in. And I was like, oh, that was not appropriate. These are the rules, When you call in sick, you're sick, You can't brag him in there. Okay, so. All right, I want to give you all time to talk about what you were probably expecting you to talk about, which is like, I don't know, maybe the parts of your jobs you really enjoy, that give you joy, and the thing that you feel like you're really fortunate to be able to do. So why don't we go this time? We'll start with Aaron and then do Sonam and end with David. Yeah. So Aaron, what do you say? What's that part that you really, really enjoy doing?
Besides teaching, just because we've talked about it a lot, I think,
probably podcasts because you're on so many.
Podcasts.
No.
I take care of a lot of rare malignancies and, or rare diseases. Some are even malignancies. And usually when I see these patients, they've not only seen a general doctor, they've seen an oncologist who's had to tell them, I've never even heard of this disease. And they always tell me that. I mean, can you imagine having a serious illness and the specialist, has have to look it up. They've never even heard of it. And when they finally get to me, and, not that I'm more smart than everyone else, I've just, happen to have a collection of these patients and I understand the disease process better, where I get to explain to them the disease process, that there is treatment, that we can help. And the satisfaction, I can always see it. They're like, we're so happy we found you, Dr. Goodman. Like, you have no idea. And I just think to myself, I go, I've helped this, that I've brought, even if I can't even help them medically with good medicine, like I brought some sort of satisfaction and relief to this family. And it's a recurrent occurrence in rare disease. And it's very rewarding. And it's like all my reading and all this esoteric stuff, it's helping. Even if it's only this one family, I'm making them feel better and providing some sort of relief, and I'm educating them on their illness. So that provides me great joy.
Okay, I love that, and I'm biased because like your philosophy of medicine really resonates with me, so I know I'm going to agree with you. But I want to push you on it a little bit. When I was a student or when I was a fellow, I was at the NIH, so of course there's so many referrals for the quote unquote expert. They're the expert on this rare disease, and at sometimes it was difficult for me to tell: are they an expert because they have deep knowledge, or are they an expert because no one will question when they make things up because there's no good studies, and so an expert on Burkitt's lymphoma read that, mTOR inhibition in combination with BTK inhibition maybe, has some cell culture data, and then they decide to run N of 1 phase 1 trial. So that's an extreme. So how do you balance expertise, the fact that I know the diseases that you're taking care of, there are 0 randomized trials, Rosai-Dorfman, 0, Erdheim, all these things, 0, 0, 0, histiocytic diseases, 0, 0, 0, 0. There's not even good phase 2s. There's not even a prospective phase 2 in some of them. But I do think you'll know the biology well, and I do think you'll be able to be a relief to the patient because you can explain it in a way. But when you think about how do they go forward, I feel like you must rely on the core principles of medicine that you believe in, which is that if they feel good, it's hard to make them feel better. If they feel sick, maybe I'll give it a try. Those kind of core principles. But how do you navigate that, realizing that, there's a lot of uncertainty?
Yeah, I do recognize that sometimes being an expert is an excuse for, making up bullshit. That's what I okay. But, and I used to be critical of that. But now that I am an expert, maybe on some rare,
now that I am,
like histiocytic malignancies, there is something to seeing a lot. There is, and I was wrong about it. I admit there is something to seeing a lot of these diseases, and it's more just I'm just seeing the disease process play out in real life. And now I've been doing it 5 years, and where like 5 years ago, where I would have wanted to start them on treatment, I'm now more comfortable, maybe watching them. And what I always explain to patients is, yes, histiocytic malignancies, which I see a lot of, are incredibly rare, and there's numerous subtypes. But the principles of malignant hematology or oncology apply to this, and that I'm very familiar with. If this disease is not hurting you, even if it looks pretty scary on bones, like Rosai-Dorfman can, invading the bones, but the patient's like, I feel fine. I went in for something, and they did this test, and they told me I got Rosai-Dorfman. I can explain that to them and provide reassurance. So that's kind of how I navigate it. And yeah, sometimes there is where you get to the point where you are making stuff up, but at least I have my experience to lie on, which isn't completely making up. It's off my clinical experience. And that to me is enjoyable. There's something enjoyable about doing that where there is no randomized studies, and I just have to use my best judgment. And my best judgment, I will say, is probably better than an oncologist who has never taken care of this disease.
Those are fighting words. I love it, but I do think, I love, but you know what I really want to do? A randomized controlled trial in situations like this of expert, no expert. Okay, that's it's called a tissue agnostic, expert agnostic study. Okay, Sanam, what is the part of your job that gives you the greatest joy? The greatest joy?
Gosh, there's so many, but I'll tell you, I think one of the most important things is I get up every day and I look forward to coming into work. It energizes me. And I think it's largely because maybe of an egotistic probably factor is that I feel valued. I feel valued both externally and internally. Every day, when I go home at the end of the night, I feel like I made a difference in someone's life. I made an impact that hopefully was a good impact. But I think it's incredibly important to feel valued. At my institution, by my clinical colleagues, by my chair who sits next to me, I never get the feeling of being underappreciated. And I think that's very important. And you try to become better and better when you have that, when you have that sense in you. And I love that. I think being able to make an impact and not having to worry about the financials of the job is something else that I really value. Being, in an academic setting, I don't care how much money the hospital makes. I just want to do justice to every single patient, case that I see. I don't care if I have to do a couple of extra immunos and it costs the lab a little bit more. I'll do it. I want the patient to get the best care, and nobody questions me or penalizes me for that. And I think, again, that's very valuable in my job, knowing in my heart that, I took the best care of that one patient that I possibly could.
That's really well said. I definitely feel like there are days where I know I did the best job I could for the person in front of me. But my bosses never see that, and let's just say the things my bosses see don't always get me the gratitude I'm looking for. It's not always the good, but because they don't get to see my teaching, and they don't get to see my patient care. Okay, David, but that's really well put. All you're doing is you're doing a great job. You're smart. You're good at your job, and you're getting the gratitude you deserve, Sodom. So David, what about you? What's the thing that gives you the joy?
Wow, this has been really inspiring listening to Aaron and Sanam and
you're gonna file an application to go back soon, huh?
Oh, no. Well, what I was going to say is because I'm going to give a really positive answer too, good. And you have 3 people on this podcast who are basically happy with what they do and really satisfied. And so that's really cool and inspiring. I wonder what it'd be if you had like 3 people on the podcast who were like all disgruntled. So maybe you need to make another version with.
Yeah, get a better mix.
This is the gruntled version, and that could be the disgruntled.
I should have invited, Chadi, because I think he has some tough.
Yes, we need some anger.
Yeah. But I mean, I think he's largely justified. I just want to say, if you're listening, Chadi, I do think you're largely justified. But you're right. I should get some disgruntled people. That's part 2.
The most satisfying part of my job, other than seeing the careers develop of physicians who are working with me, which is really pretty cool too, and actually overlaps a lot with helping people progress in the academic world, is that same satisfaction of being able to help a patient through a difficult time or ameliorate their suffering in some way, but to do so on potentially a larger scale. And we have programs right now in early development, everything from novel CAR Ts to molecular glue degraders to sickle cell gene therapy that we're collaborating with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on. I got an email forwarded last night from Mr. Gates himself. He's a smart dude. He had some questions about fetal hemoglobin. Anyway, tell
him to follow me on Twitter.
I don't think he's on Twitter.
He should make Malignant his book of the month. That's what I really want to see.
There you go. So it's the potential, if one of these succeeds or a subset of them succeed, to really transform human health and know that just like raising a child that you were part of that. My wife and I had dinner with our youngest a couple of weeks ago. She's doing a research project this summer out in the prairies in Minnesota, some native prairie restoration. And she told us we were good parents and spontaneously, which was very satisfying actually. And it felt like what I imagine getting a Gleevec approved would be like on the professional level, something that changes the natural history of disease and, makes people's lives better. So that's the most satisfying part of it.
That's such a beautiful metaphor, David, that Gleevec approved, it's changed the lives of, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. But hearing your daughter say you did a good job parenting is like the same thing. There's an old
but it's the same satisfaction.
The same thing. There's an old story in Hindu mythology about a race between 2 brothers, and the race was who can go around the sun or the solar system as fast as possible. And one brother's very fast. He goes very fast, runs around the whole solar system. 1 lap, 2nd lap. He's like, the other guy hasn't even started. He's like, I'm going to crush you. 3rd lap, he's going. And then the other brother runs around his parents 3 times, you know, and it has the same sort of poetry to it. So beautiful, David. That's your next JC article. No, okay. Okay. Now I'm gonna go because I'm a little bit different than all of you in the sense that. Look, I derive the same pleasure from patient care that Aaron does. I've always felt that. That's why I'm a doctor. That's why I still, you know, attend every year, and I go out of my way to find attending shifts. I'm always sniffing around and signing up for extra things because I do derive that pleasure that Aaron talks about, and I appreciate, like Sonam says, if I get a pat on the back, but these days it's few and far between, to be honest with you. But I guess the one thing that keeps me, because I think I could do patient care elsewhere, and I think I could, you know, even try to reach people elsewhere, because these days, as Chadi proves, I mean, you don't have to be in the university to have a podcast and videos and, you know, and try to reach people and teach people. And as you prove, David, you're teaching people every day, you know, so I don't think you have to be anywhere. The only thing that keeps me in the university is the one thing I can do with this that I can't do, I think, from any other sort of perch, is that anytime I get any idea that's as crazy or, you know, whatever, out of unconventional, in my wheelhouse or outside my wheelhouse, I can find a few people who are equally interested, and we can devote huge amounts of energy to that idea and really, really do some stuff in that space that, you know, and so, like, I don't know, what are some random things we're working on? You know, we dug through all the drug dosing of every head-to-head randomized every head-to-head trial in cancer medicine to look both at starting doses and then dose modification schema to figure out where do they come up with starting doses. Is it always MTD? Are they looking at biologically optimized dosing? How do they think about dosing? So that's something like very esoteric in cancer drug development. But then I can also do, we have an ongoing systematic review meta-analysis of myocarditis after dose 2 of every single vaccine you can think of. The differences in myocarditis by dose, by, you know, spreading the interval, by changing, you know, the construct, etc. And then we also have projects looking at, you know, the history of vaccine approval for the COVID-19 pandemic, and even more broadly, vaccine approval more broadly. And then I got pulled into a tangent about, you know, the impact of schools on childhood outcomes, and then also, can tutoring make up for deficits in education? Is there an age by which that can? So, okay, so I'm put a foot in education research. You know, it's a few places on earth where you could spend 10% of your time for a month thinking about something that is literally very random. And that's the part that I really appreciate. I think that's the part that trapped me in the university. It's the intellectual golden handcuff, that you have that freedom. And that you may not get a pat on the back for it, but you certainly won't get too many slaps. Nothing you can't take. Okay, so I guess we did a thing. Our time is up. We talked for quite a long time. I'll let you all have any closing thoughts. Closing thoughts on this question. I think one of the challenges of this discussion is the challenge that David says, which is, everyone here is actually probably somebody who tends to run pretty happy. I'm a believer that actually that happiness question, that McEnroe question you're talking about, I'm a believer that happiness is something, you have your set point. You know, it doesn't matter really what happens to you in life. You're just going to get back to your set point. And you always think, oh, it's this thing and that thing that makes me here. It's just who you are. You can get all the accomplishments and adulations. You just come back to your set point. Look at McEnroe at his prime. He was really the king. I mean, he was terrific. Only Bjorn Borg was his rival, right? You know, so when McEnroe was great, he would, you know, but he still just comes to a set point. And then you can have difficulties and challenges and also kind of just come back to your set point. And I think that defines all of you. Your set point is probably higher. And when your set point is higher, you're much more likely to stay doing what you're doing for longer, rather than constantly looking for the grass is greener. And I think also your attitudes about challenges also speaks to, I think, the ability to overstand and ignore the unpleasant parts of anything. Anybody's job has some unpleasant parts. But, you know, all of you see challenges important, so you're probably likely to ignore that. Okay, any closing thoughts on this issue? Maybe I'll start with you, Aaron. And then we'll go David, and then Sonam will close it out. Closing thoughts. Yeah. Is it your personality that explains everything?
I mean, I don't know if you asked my wife what she thinks, but
that's the real question.
Yeah, I've said this a lot, and I don't know. And then people point out, well, you're lucky, you know. I mean, if you do what you want and what makes you happy, what brings you joy, you know, well, I'm allowed to do that in my current structure. Maybe others are not. But just, I think what I've gotten better at, things that bog you down or upset you, just don't let, I mean, it's I mean, in the grand scheme of things, usually don't matter for the most part. And at least with what I do, what matters most is, what's life or death is my patients, and making sure that's good. All the other stuff, which is usually the stuff that bogs me down or causes unhappiness, doesn't actually really matter. Maybe it matters. It seems to matter in that moment, but I think as we've all experienced, 2 weeks later, it doesn't really matter. I think that kind of, and it took me a little bit to get to that point, has definitely made me a happier person. Those are my closing thoughts. And then also,
go ahead.
Having I couldn't do it without my family. And I have an awesome wife and awesome kids, and that support me. And without they do get credit for that. And without that, I couldn't do what I do. I understand that I couldn't. I go travel. I couldn't do it without the family that I have. So I'm lucky.
And the only corollary I'll add to what you're saying is that I think other people who say you're lucky to have the schedule and job you like, they need to push it more the way they want. Do what you want and tell them to go to hell if they tell you.
No, I mean, you're right. And used to, I think I couldn't, you said, take advantage of the fellows who just, UCSD gave me a job. And let's just say when I started, it wasn't as good as what I got now. And I did, I got to they're like, you got to do these committees. And I said, I don't want to do them. I did them. I don't like them. I'm not doing it. Guess what? They promoted me to an associate. You got to push back a little bit.
You got to push back
and do what you want. You do actually. Sometimes you'd be labeled as, difficult person, but you do have to push back. Not all the time, but you do have to push back.
It's a positive assertiveness. We'll call it that. Yeah. David, closing thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, and there's good data to support your assertion about a happiness set point. If you look at people who win Powerball or another big
yeah, you're right. Yeah, they regress.
A year or two later, they're back. People who have a life-altering injury, an amputation, paralyzation, or something, they go through a dark tea time of the soul and very tough time for a while. But a year or two later, they're often back close to where they were. So I think that it's all about the microenvironment. And if you can make your microenvironment, and get satisfaction from the work and the conditions around you, then you're in great shape. I'm sure there are lots of industry settings where I would be absolutely miserable and not doing work that I found satisfying, or being asked to do things that were contrary to my moral compass. I'm not in that kind of an environment. I'm in an environment with people I like and respect, working on projects that I enjoy. And in academia, things changed over time. There were some times when that microenvironment was very happy and productive and nurturing, and other times when it was tougher and changes needed to be made. So I think that within any setting, the more you can do, as Aaron described, to try to craft a situation for yourself that is acceptable. Into each life, a little rain must fall. Certain things to get to perhaps a greater goal, a greater benefit. And a lot of people think happiness is not necessarily the best metric. It's more about that deep sense of making a contribution. Some people are maybe miserable in their work, but they're making enough money to support their family, to get great satisfaction from seeing their children grow up and how they're able to provide for their family. And for them, that work, it could be better, but it's part of their bigger situation. So that would be my thought, would be, try to find an environment wherever you are where you can, be your best self. As Lincoln said, whatever you are, try to be a good one.
That's really well said. I think you're referring to that. Is it Arthur C. Brooks' article on the goal of life? Yeah, and I agree with that sentiment. And I think it's a good fit for you to be in a place like Novartis, a place that's doing great science. And I don't think you'd feel the same if you were working for Karyopharm, as they say. So, Sanam, I'll give you some closing thoughts. Closing thoughts.
Yeah, of course. I agree with everything that Aaron and David said so beautifully. I think I want to emphasize 2 points. I think for the younger folks maybe listening to this and considering a career in medicine, people tend to overemphasize the negative on social media. So don't listen to that. This is still a great job. I think, getting to getting to a place where you actually can make an impact in medicine, it takes a long time and it's a tough journey maybe, but once you get there, it's actually not a difficult job. You know, you become an expert in some area, you become so good at it that it almost becomes natural to you, but you're making real impact in people's lives. And, you know, I think this is a privilege. It's not something that we have to do. It's a privilege. People trust their lives with you. So, you know, take advantage of that. It's still the best career in the world. I would, if I had to go back and do it a million times over again, I would choose medicine, academic medicine, a million times over again.
Wow. And I think that's the right note to end. So, you know, thank you all for doing this, for taking time out of your busy schedule, for going through the requisite hoops to get on the show. That's another discussion. Next time I'll be back. Same discussion. 3 disgruntled. Maybe even 2 will be 2 terminated. Hey, in oncology, they're not too hard to find. They're not too hard to find these days. 2 terminated and 3 disgruntled people, but this time we brought you 3 wonderful people sharing their experiences. Thank you all so much. Thanks for doing this episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.